Well, we are back today with an exciting episode. We're going to be talking about the Jade Egg, and I'm actually going to be interviewing the world's foremost expert into it. Yours truly, Dr. Saida E. Desilets.
Jeez, you have to throw that E in there.
So, you have a doctorate in psychology and with a specialty in psychosexuality.
Correct.
You also are the founder of EPSM. We'll go into what those mean, all those crazy letters.
Yes.
Also, I would say that you are a leader and a co-creator in the new wave of sex therapy since Masterson Johnson. We'll get into what that means. And lastly, I would also say that you are the mother of the new wave of our modern day Jade Egg practice.
Oh, well, wow, that's a lot. All right.
Well, this episode I really wanted to talk about, well, first of all, what is the Jade Egg?
Yes.
What is the practice? Where does it come from? Why would you be the mother of it? And also, like, how would I put it? How can this practice actually, or do you think it's possible that this practice can condition you for what I call sexual maturity, meaning on an emotional level as well as physically conditioned level?
Oh, that's going to be juicy. And I'm hoping in the longer part of the episode, I want to share some pretty funny stories and some deep healing stories of the process of deeply learning this over a long period of time.
Talk about some direct experiences as well about how this can influence someone in a relationship, as well as then what it feels like to be in the bedroom, both on the giving and receiving side. And if you're the giver of a Jade Egg practice, that means you, the woman, are actually doing things.
We're doing some interesting things, actually.
Well, let's start off and just get into, what is the Jade Egg?
This thing?
That thing right there. All right. Well, so, what is that thing?
Well, this, just to be direct, is a piece of Canadian mined nephrite jade. It's been GIA certified, which means there's a organizing body that looks at minerals and goes, this is real, this is fake. And the reason that's so important to me was in the beginning when I first started selling this, my source for getting the eggs, they were actually using granite and then painting the eggs, and I didn't know. And then customers would get back and go, why is there weird colored goop coming out of me?
Wait just a second. So this is actually happening then? Like it's not happen. Real? All right. Well, is this common?
I don't know if it was common. It was my experience at that time. There were not a lot of resources to get jade eggs. I had trusted that resource because it's where I actually went for some training, and I thought, okay, well, if they're selling eggs, then they must also know what they're doing. And I felt horrified and really embarrassed that what I'd been selling women in Canada wasn't real jade and was definitely like toxic.
Where is this other mine from?
I don't know. China, Thailand, somewhere in Asia.
Okay.
And then I was sold another type of jade egg from a woman in Germany. Turns out that wasn't jade either. It was serpentine. There's nothing wrong with serpentine, but I was selling it as jade. So again, I felt like horrible because I was... So anyways, the long story short is I finally went directly and visited a jade mine in British Columbia and met the miner, met his family. It's a family-run business. They sustainably mine, and they loved the idea of empowering women. And so I ended up purchasing this massive boulder that is probably still getting eggs carved out of it many years ago. And
you know how big this boulder was? Like when you look at it, like
it's massive. It's the size of a small car.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's a massive boulder. But before I purchased that, I wanted to make sure that the jade was real, even though I was quote unquote at a jade mine. So I sent it in to the GIA. Which is the Gem something association, something, I don't know what it means. So, and they return the sample and they list everything that it is, and they certified it is actually real nephrite jade. And I was like, fantastic. So that's what this is. And it's in the shape of a little egg because it's a very comfortable shape to have intravaginally.
All right. Well, why would someone choose jade as opposed to then some other stone?
Jade has really been used for a very long time for different tribes around communication. So they felt that if you get a piece of stone from the same stone and share that with your family or loved ones, that you could communicate and be in contact with them. So I thought that was kind of interesting as a tribe of Jade Egg users, that we were all like somehow connected.
They all come from that same
Whether or not that's true, I don't know, but I thought it was an interesting idea. Another reason that people would wear it in the past would be for protection. And the longer a user wears, the more the jade would take on its own quality. So it's a really interesting stone that way. It can darken, it can lighten, just depending on the chemistry of a person's skin. And by wearing, I mean externally, like bracelets and things like that. And then I found out that jade is incredibly tough. And what I mean by that is if you took two eggs, another crystal egg and a jade egg, and you dropped them from the same height, the jade egg would just roll away. It might bounce, but it'll roll away undamaged. The other one will probably shatter. Yeah. And so this became a concern, because whether or not people like to admit this, the egg is going to fall out. And it's going to fall out a lot of times. So then it becomes a really expensive investment if, when your egg falls out, it maybe doesn't shatter, but it gets a little crack, and that little crack can cut you internally or start collecting bacteria and other problems.
All right. Well, I've also noticed too, just when I hold jade, it's heavy.
It's heavy.
It feels very heavy for the size.
It's dense, and the reason that it's dense is, rather than having a porous structure like most crystals, it actually has interwoven fibers, and they're really hard. So mining jade is quite expensive, because it takes no time to take out other crystals. But the jade, they have to go through machine after machine just to be able to extract it. It's so tough to get out.
Oh, they use a diamond tip or something?
It's not bendable. It's just, the fibers are so tough. And that's the other reason, many years ago, there was a controversy around porosity and the problem. Well, first of all, fingers are porous. Just saying.
Well, that's a good point.
And so are cucumbers, by the way.
Expound about that a little bit.
So there was this controversy around the porosity, and at some point, I was speaking to someone else in this industry, and she had been selling, the majority of her eggs were rose quartz, and she was having a lot of actual reports and problems from women going of bacterial infection. And what I had found, I was given some other type of a wand, a crystal wand for internal use. And what I noticed, no matter how much I washed it, it started to change a weird color. And because of the porosity, the vaginal juices would get into those pores and make its way deeper into the crystal. So even if I washed it, I wasn't able to extract everything. Okay. So that's why the interwoven, interlaced fibers are really fantastic. Never known a single case, and I've sold tens of thousands of these by now, that there's been a problem. Some infections have appeared, but that's because a person like myself, and I'll talk about that more soon, I had chronic vaginal issues. And in the beginning, when you learn this practice, you're actually making the tissues healthier. And so that's one of the ways that the body can purge, is if you've used suppressants, like if you've had yeast infections and you use certain types of creams and suppositories, it actually suppresses. The yeast doesn't get rid of it. So it just gets pushed further into the body, and the candida doesn't get handled properly.
So by doing this practice, then it starts to bring everything out.
Well, and that's because we're psychosexual beings. A lot of times when we have these things, it's because we also have emotions that are in there. We're not addressing those emotions. And when someone's stressed and angry, it creates a certain level of pH in the vagina compared to when you're happy and you're relaxed and feeling good.
Well, let's talk then about the psychosexual aspect of Jade Egg practice. Because when I see things out there on Jade Egg, it's always like, oh, I can lift a surfboard between my legs, or carry a chandelier, or blow ping pong balls across the room, or normally there's some kind of goddess-like qualities, or they promise a lot of different things around spirituality. And so before we kind of maybe talk about some of the myths that are out there, what is a Jade Egg practice, and what do you actually do with it?
Well, for those who don't know, you would be putting the egg into the vagina, and there's a very particular way to actually do that. versus just shoving it in, which is how the majority of the population deal with vaginas. They shove fingers in, they shove tampons in, they shove speculums in. And what that does actually is it trains and numbs out that vaginal opening, which actually affects penetrative sex.
Okay. Well, so for all you out there now who are listening in and wondering, what kind of practice should I do? What kind of promises are out there? I want to ask on behalf of all of you, well, what are then, you said, these top false promises that are being normalized in the market? Maybe also too, there seemed to be a time period, I think it was around when Goop had really been pushing it forwards, and then all of a sudden the whole Jade Egg practice got really attacked.
Yes. And I actually agreed with the doctors and pelvic pain therapists who were attacking the practice at that time, which people were like, how can you agree with them? You sell them. I'm like, I don't sell eggs. What I do is I sell courses so that women can be empowered with their sexuality. The egg is a tool that they can use within the spectrum of that course. Okay. I'm not selling eggs. People sell eggs. They sell eggs like they're, the next candy, the next promise.
Don't you break your teeth on them. They're pretty hard.
Well, the next, this goddess maker, the next thing that's going to clear all of your emotional troubles, all of your relationship troubles. It's just not true. And it actually, unfortunately, is an industry that's really cashing in the insecurities of the regular woman who's struggling just to know herself.
All right. Well, but I mean, it is a psychosexual practice. First of all, what is a psychosexual practice?
So psychosexuality is just simply how your genitals are connected with how you think and feel. So what that means is if you have a belief that your genitals are dirty or bad, and you feel gross, it actually affects how you interact with your genitals. You could also have an experience through the genitals that isn't nice, that then ends up making you feel afraid, and then you believe sex is hurtful, for example. So it can go either direction, either through a physical cause with an emotional and psychological response, or a psychological emotional cause that then has a physical response.
So how does that look then for a person who's deciding to use the egg?
Yes. The invitation to this practice, which is really quite remarkable, and I think it's a skill set that's going to serve the person for the rest of their life, is to build really profound intimacy with yourself. So that's one. That's the psychosexual piece. Can you actually make contact with this part of your body in a respectful manner? Then the next layer of that is, can we gently, slowly start to create new beliefs, new ideas, new frameworks that actually let you feel more empowered about your body, your life, your pleasure. And then on a physical level, can you develop a somatic awareness, a interoceptive awareness that will allow you to build more sensitivity, more pleasure, and even a skill where you could follow that pleasure into new areas that you've never experienced before.
Now, when you say interoceptive awareness, you're talking about the ability to feel yourself and be aware of what's happening internally inside your body.
Correct.
And by somatic, you mean that it's an actual body practice, that you're not just sitting here.
It's not just your mind. The problem is we currently have an epidemic of numbness. So that's the biggest issue. So a lot of women, the number one thing they will come to me with a complaint is, I don't feel my egg. That is probably a daily email that we're getting. It is really natural not to feel the egg. There's several reasons for it. One, there could be just genuine numbness. Two, it's not massive. However, take the egg away, use your finger. Can you feel your finger? Some women can't even feel their own finger. So it's not the egg, it's just that the tissue itself isn't awake. I like to refer to it as the sleeping beauty. So there's a process of building sensitivity, but we need to understand almost every girl when she's young has been conditioned to not build her awareness in this area of her body. She's been told that it's not safe. She's been told that it's safer if she doesn't feel. So numbness can come from a multitude of reasons, but in the beginning, there's a lot of fear that's given to young women around keeping them safe. Rightly so, because there's a lot of problems in the world around, perpetrators and people not respecting the female body.
Well, it's an interesting one with numbness, because typically we think of numbness as like, oh, something like the nerves are dead, we can't feel anything. And I remember having a talk with Dr. Lauren Davis, this amazing osteopath, and she was saying the way that numbness can also be experienced, though, is not that your nerves aren't firing, but you're just not attuned to that level of sensation.
Correct. So that's the other thing. How we self-pleasure often is how we are going to experience sex and our genitals. And so right now there's a large amount of women that the first time they discover quote-unquote orgasm is through the use of a vibrator. And often it's a girlfriend or an auntie or someone who said, you know, have you tried this? Everyone's doing it. It's normal. It's healthy. It's an empowerment of your femininity. Like, don't worry about it. Here's one for your birthday. Here's one for your graduation. I mean, it's a fairly common thing now. It's the biggest growing industry in the sexual wellness is vibrators. It's quite amazing.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I mean, I've been a world traveler. I did my master's in Denmark. And during my time in Scandinavia, between Sweden and Norway and Denmark, I had never been with partners that took as long to orgasm as those in Scandinavia had, the Scandinavians. And so my jaw was sore, but like I just remembered like being really like interested in this. And I mean, this hasn't been scientifically tested. You know, I guess there was a decent data set.
Jeez.
But I was, though, very interested in hearing, though, when I would kind of ask different questions. Almost all of them had been introduced to vibrators very early on by their mothers, and by early on I mean relative to when I was in Latin America or other parts of Europe and the US, etc. And so even though there was this sense of like more ease with being naked, also this kind of a little bit more I can be free with sexuality, even a lot of times they would be the ones like going after the men. They were struggling, though, when it came to not being stimulated in a very particular way. And so is there any kind of scientific evidence then at all that, well, the Jade Egg works?
Oh, there's probably not enough evidence. There's things that you could look at and correlate it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that when you're mentioning Dr. Lauren Davis, I think we should have her on the podcast just to talk about this.
Well, we've already had to talk about, well, her and her amazing also husband, who's also an osteopath. They talked about sex during pregnancy. It was an amazing episode.
We haven't released that yet.
Oh, well, something to look forward to.
But we did interview them, and we interviewed her around vibrators, and she had some beautiful things to say. But essentially in that discussion, she had mentioned how there's now research showing that consistent pressure is actually much better in terms of generating...
Consistent and light pressure as well.
Consistent light pressure is better at generating what my words are for it is relaxed arousal.
Yes.
So it's this ability to be turned on, but not alarmed.
Yes.
Turned on and relaxed. And that's not something we see a lot in porn or most sex ed or movies or any kind of example that a person might be influenced by.
Well, and I think it made a lot of sense then with, I mean, if you have, I mean, like, 'cause, now correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of the Jade Egg practice, when you're actually using the egg, now I know that you teach a significant portion happens even before putting the egg in, but once the egg is in, it's within the vaginal canal. There's different things you can do to move it in different ways and also just to be aware of it. But as it stays inside, well, what does it do? It has a consistent light pressure that's activating the vaginal walls.
I love that you bring this up. Can you see I'm like getting turned on? I love it because all of my career, I have been accused that if women wear, and there are practitioners out there who vehemently say that if you wear the egg more than a few minutes, you're going to deform your vaginal canal.
All right.
Now, I have been using this practice for decades.
They said more than what, a few minutes?
Yes. So
people use vibrators and dildos. Nice. That's like
no, like you wear it around, it deforms the actual vaginal canal.
Yeah, I'm just saying if you put a vibrator or dildo in for more than a few minutes, which I think isn't that abnormal, you'd think then it's going to deform the...
I understand.
Okay.
But with women who consistently cannot keep the egg in. There's many reasons. We'll get into that as well. And it doesn't mean that something's wrong or broken, by the way. There's just different reasons why the egg won't stay in, and you can train your body to accept the egg. I mean, I still remember putting the egg in the first time, and it literally shot out like across the room and slammed into the wall. I was so glad there was no one standing there.
Well, I was going to ask if this practice is safe, but I guess I should ask, is it safe for others, not just for the person using it?
Make sure no one's around when you first try it. And that shocked me. And I was very young when I first started, or in my early 20s, using this. So I hadn't had babies. There was no reason why the egg shouldn't stay inside, but it kept shooting out, it kept falling out, and I had to retrain how my vagina responded to the presence.
Why did it shoot out?
Because because I'd been someone who orgasms and ejaculates since I was 12, then those muscles of pushing, bearing down and pushing out during
deeper muscles
orgasm, those were strong, but the outer muscles that close the vaginal opening, they weren't as exercised, because those muscles get exercised when you use vibrators.
Okay.
That's what pulse is. That's what gives that kind of pulsy feeling. So I had never used a vibrator, and I didn't know better. And I was a dancer. I was a trained professional dancer in ballet and modern and other styles. So I obviously had quite like some tone issues going on as well. But anyways, over time I retrained my vagina where I could even, as you said earlier, lift weights with it, but that is an advanced practice, and it should only ever really be taught in person with supervision.
So this created then eventually a balance between the more kind of outer muscles and those deeper inner ones?
Yeah.
All right, well, that's interesting.
And for ladies where they have a really tight, strong lower muscles, the practice will even out and strengthen the deeper muscles. And that then gives them access to whole new types of orgasm and pleasure.
Well, I remember we went to Ohio State University, and we had the privilege of sitting with
Dr. Maggie.
Dr. Maggie, yeah,
She's
exactly.
amazing!
And she is like a ninja when it comes to
Yes.
being a pelvic floor specialist. She's the one that kind of trains the trainers.
And she's against the egg.
Well, that was interesting though, because I was going to bring that up. So you'd asked her what she felt about it, and she said she didn't feel well. And I remember your answer was, well, if it's done incorrectly, then it of course isn't safe. And you said the same way that she talks about Kegels not being done correctly or actually creating damage, it's the same thing with the Jade Egg. And I remember it got her to start thinking and go, oh, okay. Well,
exactly.
Can you explain a little bit about that? What is then the unsafe version of the practice versus the safe one?
Well, first I want to answer that last question in the sense of, so wearing the egg, I wear it all the time. I can wear it all day long. I used to sleep with it, but it's too energizing for me. Some women love it. They have fantastic dreams. So what I'm saying is an extended period of time. And I literally have had my pelvis examined by OBGYN, like one of the top ones in the US, by an osteopath who did literal pelvic work. Actually, 2 osteopaths now. And Dr. Maggie, a pelvic pain specialist, who directly examined, and then just a regular doctor who was also doing pelvic exams. So I've been looked at a lot. And across the board, I'm extremely healthy. Everything works really well. There's no deformities. There's even more erectile tissue than they're used to seeing in the average pelvis. So I just want to say that extended wear, when you understand how to do it properly, isn't going to deform the vagina or overstretch you or make your vagina weird.
Well, I know that you've been doing some amazing scientific work with Dr. Deborah Wickman.
Yes.
Now, you probably can't speak in depth about that because it is a yet to be released, published paper. But, I mean, what are you able to say about that?
What I can say is that through a psychosexual framework, so how you feel and the things that you believe and think in connection to how you're interoceptively aware of your vagina, those two things. So you're emotionally connected with yourself, you have a healthy framework from which you're working with your mind in connection with the body, and you have proper functional mechanics of using the vagina. those factors have resulted in optimization of the actual tissues. So one thing I can speak to is we had a lady examined. She was in her 70s, and when she was first examined by Dr. Whitman, typical pelvic exam with the speculum, examining the tissue, everything, she looked like a woman in her 70s. Mm-hmm. Well, after a year and a half, so she learned the Jade Egg practice from me and was vigilant with it, but not overly practicing, just healthy amount, just what was true for her body. She went back, we did another pelvic exam a year and a half later, and Dr. Whitman looked up completely startled and said, wow, you have the vagina of a 30-year-old. And that's when Dr. Whitman got very interested in studying my students because she had never seen rejuvenation at that level naturally with women just learning how to breathe and move properly.
So what kind of set of data are we talking about? Like, how are you allowed to talk about how many women like this study is going to be looking into?
Well, Dr. Whitman did a control group of 300 patients.
That's significant.
Yeah. And we looked at over 30 of my students. It's hard to examine. They're from all over the world. There's only a small set of people who we wanted to look at the ones who are actually doing the practice regularly.
Precisely.
Many people learn, but they're not regular with their practice. And so across the board, we found that to be true. Like it was 100% of the women who do my training.
Similar to what happened to the 7-year-old woman that they've...
everybody had...
rejuvenation.
They had rejuvenation and also an upgrade in their sexual function.
That's incredible. Now, we normally don't go over 20 minutes in the non-members portion, but today is a special episode because I just think the world really needs to know about this, and there's such a big myth out there around the egg doing this or not doing that, and so then it either just kind of gets thrown out or it's looked at as like the savior. And when I first started like kind of reading about the women's practices, I saw some stuff like, I think it was like Kim Anami with like surfboards, and I think I saw some stuff with Layla Martin as well when she first was doing her YouTube, and there was like ping pong balls shooting out later and all these things. So it was interesting for me, and I just kind of want to go into like, well, what is the effect? In fact, actually, when I was looking at Kim Anami stuff, she was referencing a Russian woman who could hold, I forget,
she's
like 23
the world
kilos.
record the holder.
And when I also then...
That's a special forces training, by the way.
Well, I think I read some...
of the femme fatale.
Don't quote me on this, but I believe I read somewhere that like literally like it would like choke out her husband. And so I kind of want to hear like what is...
Let's speak about that because when I first got involved in all of this, I also believed all the wow stuff. I thought I could become immortal, literally physically immortal, and stay young forever. These were some of the promises. And
what happens if you use 2 eggs?
Well, then you're supposed to be able to tap them. And,
double immortal.
and then with the weightlifting, that was supposed to be enhancing that even more, that immortality, that youthfulness, etc. And so what had happened though, and you have to do an exam, by the way, in front of people, like lifting weights with your vagina. So at the time of my exam, nobody brought weights. So they grabbed a Lao Tzu statue and they're like, that's about the right amount of weight. And they had me tie my string around the statue, and I had to dangle that statue
this needs to be an Olympic event.
Like 5 minutes while they all observed to see if I was, actually properly doing the weightlifting. I passed the exam, and I have a different relationship with that now.
So he has a different relationship with you as well.
Yeah, well, he rides an ox, so
okay.
There you go. Anyways, what I did though in training, overly training in that direction, is when I would have lovers, I would actually create sexual dysfunction for them. So I was able to squeeze so hard that they would lose their erection and sex would stop. And that to me was like a no-go.
This is like a whole other level of UFC.
Yeah.
Like talking before, like the guillotine and the rear naked chokehold, like.
What's the front naked choke? I don't know what you call it. But yeah, so and it wasn't actually pleasant. to be squeezed that hard for a prolonged period of time, because I really believed that I needed a tight vagina that could squeeze the living bejesus out of any man in order to be like a sex goddess. I really, really believed that. But life taught me otherwise, and it actually really humbled me in working with real women, all ages, all different backgrounds, and starting to realize this isn't a freak show. This is deep. This is huge. There's so much pain, so much healing, so much in this landscape that needs to be addressed in a really sensitive way. It's not a gym exercise. It's not a playground. It's not a party. You can treat it that way. But in the context that I was having with woman after woman after woman, and each story so different and so much going on, I had to develop a deep sensitivity. I had to be very aware that people have trauma. It wasn't uncommon when I was first starting to teach that women would relive their rape traumas and other traumas right there in the class. So there's a certain level of wherewithal that you need. You can't just, because you can re-traumatize people.
So this isn't just re-traumatize from a pelvic floor perspective.
Yes.
But also then from a psychological perspective.
Correct. So that's when I decided I need a lot more training. I can't just be trained in this one like Taoist school. I need to actually go get a psychology degree to understand the mind and the emotions. And then I didn't stop there. I decided to do a PhD. So
well, we'll get to that in a second. I kind of want to back up for a second then. Okay, so what are then the origins of the Jade Egg practice, and why are you then the mother of the modern day Jade Egg practice?
Okay, and then you want me to answer the other ways of doing the practice?
We'll get into it.
Okay, that was your question earlier. Well, the origins, no one really knows. When I was really into this stuff in the beginning, I was wowed by the mythology of it. I was wowed that the Chinese had this idea that jade is the semen of dragons, and so women were putting drops of dragon semen in their bodies. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is so cool. I love this idea that there were special concubines that were like Taoist practitioners that were the concubines of various different emperors through different times, and teaching those emperors this way and that way. But essentially the concubines that pleased the emperor the most were the ones that were favored the most. So of course, knowing these things probably back then made sense. But as I started to really inquire about that, trying to find actual documents, I couldn't find any. So I was like, oh, I don't know if these stories are true or not. They sound nice, but I don't know. As an academic, I couldn't find like tangible sources. That doesn't mean they're not out there, but I couldn't find them. And then I started to read that in other cultures, women in many cultures in the ancient times would do things for fertility. So many small phallic-like objects have been found, and the stories or ideas around that were that they were to help women with fertility. So across Asia, across the Middle East, across Africa, there's traditions of women putting things inside their vaginas, and probably again in those days, fertility is divine. It's the supreme reason of the feminine body is to bring forth life, and so therefore you would need to care for your genitals and really honor and respect this part of the body. And you probably were taught secret practices. Most of all female traditions are oral traditions. They're not written. They're passed down from mother to daughter or grandmother to granddaughter, or like the village matriarch. In either like in my native Canadian tradition, we'd have moon lodges where we all menstruate together and sing and pray and be, and then there's teachings that are shared by older women to the younger women. So I believe that there's probably a lot of lost wisdom, and I don't really know the real origins. I know that the school that I learned with, they didn't start out with jade originally. They started out with obsidian.
Okay.
Yeah, obsidian's also a nice choice. It's pretty much glass in the sense of porosity. It's a great choice. But when that thing hits the floor, it smashes into a trillion pieces. So it becomes expensive to keep up the obsidian stock. But that's where it first started, and then I think Jade was just, they switched over to it, because it is a exalted stone in Chinese tradition and Taoist tradition, and it's also, as I said, it won't smash, so it's more durable and makes sense to use that.
Less cleanup, less cut feet. Well, then how was that practice being taught? And how has your practice then brought in like the modern day Jade Egg movement?
Yeah, I think this is a really important thing to bring to light. I'm a weird person. When I get into something, I really get into it. So I was terrified of going underwater as a kid, terrified. So what did I do as a young adult? I became a dive master. So this is how I approach everything. If I'm interested in something, I don't lightly touch it. I do the deep dive, and I go as far as I can with it. So when this practice first came to my mind, I remember actually walking through one of those weird kind of new age bookstores, and there's a sex section. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to the sex section. And this book literally like fell off the bookshelf to my feet, and it was the original Montauk Chia female practice book. And I was like, what the hell is this thing? And I immediately purchased it, and I went home, and I was like, oh, I need one of these egg-shaped things, and I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. I went to a crystal shop and bought a random egg-shaped egg thing, and it was like way too small and not the right stone, but I didn't know at the time. And that's when it like flew out of my body. I'm like, I don't understand this at all. But essentially it flew out of my body because the practice originally was taught as a martial arts practice. It was called ovarian kung fu. And it was basically the
martial arts, so they used it as an attack?
No, but it's a training. Like
I'm joking.
The kung fu is more just a training, a harnessing. And so ovarian harnessing. And you started it in a horse stance. If you don't know what that is, it's the legs spread wider than your hips.
Exactly.
And you have to kind of squat down.
Yes.
And so that position, if you're a beginner, is quite difficult because the pelvic floor in that position and the vagina will be quite open and bearing down. So if you put something in, you're going to have to squeeze the bejesus out of it just to try and keep it in. And then you're doing a pumping breath. This kind of pumping breath.
Well, I can see why it shot out then.
So yeah, I went screaming out. It's like, wow.
I think it should be a martial arts move. Artillery.
And at that point I gave up. I didn't know what I was doing. I just gave up on it.
Yeah.
My boyfriend was terrified of the male book. He wouldn't go anywhere near it.
I thought you were going to say he was terrified of you after the...
No. We were having fantastic sex already. Okay. So, he was like, why ruin something good? I don't know what this weird stuff is. He was a scientist at the University of British Columbia, and he didn't want anything woo-woo around him. So anyways, fast forward, at one point I returned to the practice because I felt something true about it, and I had gone through a violent rape experience, and there was an element of needing to not manipulate with my sexual energy, become like better at relating, becoming a better partner. There were I was having chronic yeast infections, chronic bladder infections. I mean, I had a lot of problems in this area. My menstrual cycle was difficult, so all of those things really added up. And so I went back to it and I said, well, I am a dancer and I'm a body worker. Let me just listen to my body. And then an entire series of exercises, about 60 of them, were developed over time, and a majority of them are lying down practices.
So before that, this school did not have
lying down, at best sitting, standing and sitting. And that is why I was invited to the school to bring this feminine way of doing the practice, and why it was incorporated throughout the entire school after that.
And this is probably the school, go ahead.
That was like in 2002.
Okay, and so then after that, I think you mentioned something like their pamphlets changed.
Yeah, I was actually on the pamphlet for a really long time with my practices.
So any of you out there who have bought a Jade Egg course or done a Jade Egg course, and if there is a lying down practice, it comes from her.
Unfortunately, though, a lot of people haven't trained with me, and what I left that school with was not a teacher's manual. It was just them observing from the outside. So I wondered for years why there were so many people copying my work and doing it really badly. And then when I would try and talk to them about it, they'd basically tell me to F off. Like, who the hell are you? I'm like, wow, okay. I'm just really trying to help you out here. And I realized that they were just being poorly trained because I had never left an actual teacher training at that school. And I didn't myself want to teach teachers for a long, long time because I just didn't like the way that teachers become the competitor of the main person. Like, this is stupid. How do we create community from that? But eventually I worked my way around that.
Well, I mean, this is something then, like, so when I see a lot of marketing around the Jade Egg, it's about like this rough and tough, like super powerful, put you in a headlock vagina due to the tough and buff. Yeah. And it reminds me of like maybe the Hulk or the Thing, you know, with the Rock, the like really big, strong, like almost roided out type of superhero, because it seems what they're promoting is that there's this really strong vagina. And I mean, what do you say about that practice then, that's using this kind of more weightlifting, or is just training just to go for strength?
Well, let's go back to Dr. Maggie and Dr. Maggie's concerns, which have been my concerns as well. And if you do this practice incorrectly, essentially what you're going to be doing is not just Dr. Maggie's concerns. I have other pelvic specialists that I know that they also share the concern. I have OBGYNs, like many doctors, anyone who actually kind of works with that area of the body, they're concerned when a woman is training herself into sexual dysfunction. And so sexual dysfunction isn't an elderly issue. Sexual dysfunction can happen in women who are as young as 17, 18, 19 years old. And the reason for that is sometimes if you're an athlete, if you do Pilates, too much yoga, these types of exercises create so much tension in the pelvic floor that these very young women are peeing themselves. Some of them are experiencing organ prolapse to the point where even their own uterus is coming out of their body, which is a stage 4 prolapse.
Wow.
So it's not good. It's very problematic, and there are healthy ways to do this. But this is what happens when, quote unquote, Vogue gets a hold of an idea, just as it with Kegling. A lot of times it's done super wrong. So you get a hold of an idea and nobody's properly trained, and everyone gets excited. They want to have the super pussy, and they start doing this thing. And for some people, they're just already healthy. It's not going to be a problem. Like, it wasn't a problem for me. I didn't go into sexual dysfunction. But it's definitely a problem for a lot of people.
It's the same thing with weightlifting. I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, there's a good likelihood that you're going to create more damage.
I hurt myself weightlifting. I didn't have proper training when I first started, and I actually injured my spine so bad I couldn't walk from weightlifting. So we need to love our bodies and really understand if you're not born into a family that knows this stuff, then respect your body enough to go learn whatever the sport or the art is directly from someone who's got fantastic training.
Well, then let's go briefly then, before we finish up this first section here. Just what are then some people that, if they're out there, how can they recognize maybe the practice they've been introduced to isn't good, and what are some safe practices if you just wanted to like kind of get them started a little bit? I mean, it sounds like their egg should not be washing out and turning into the color of a granite stone, so it's dyed or painted.
Just being really aware of the source of that. The source of the stone. The source of the stone. But honestly, if you are just starting to explore this, don't use an egg. The warning sign is that the egg gets used immediately. That's number one. So if the course you're taking, the first thing they do is they instantly start using the egg, just ask for a refund. And the reason for that is there's a little bit of preparatory training that's required prior to ever bringing the egg in.
And this is just the cleaning, or what do you mean?
Not just the cleaning, but there is some cleaning. There's hopefully a place to add a string. I've had many women contact me who didn't have proper training, have to go to the ER to remove their egg because they panicked and there was no string and they couldn't get it out. Which is unfortunate because the egg eventually does come out. But occasionally you have a weirdly shaped vagina if there's been a prolapse, and the vagina might be curved like this and the egg goes up and down. You almost can't get it out without a doctor's help. So,
but it's not going to go into their womb and
no,
like
but you need to understand your body before you put it in there.
Okay.
And so the way that I train people, there's a good 3 full weeks of training long before we ever introduce the egg. And even when it's week 4 and we introduce the egg, we first use our finger. And the reason for that is the egg can't give you any biofeedback, but your finger can.
Okay.
So building that interoceptive awareness, you need the somatic awareness first. You need to be able to feel the body, sense what's happening, and then start to condition yourself to feel from different perspectives. That's really important prior to ever using the egg. Otherwise, all you're really doing is just contributing to whatever issues you have and heightening them.
Okay. Or I guess like if the person is healthy, maybe they do get something out of just having it in there, but it sounds like they're sort of missing out on a lot.
They're missing out on a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I am curious then about talking a little bit about you are having a Jade Egg offering that's coming up, and you also have this thing called EPSM. So first tell us about the Jade Egg offering that you have coming, and then flow into what is EPSM.
Okay. Well, I have an evergreen product, but occasionally that evergreen product, Jade Egg Mastery, we do a live version. And that live version is when you get to spend live time directly with me, which I think is very important. The community around that is just gorgeous. And then your questions and your concerns get addressed immediately. So that kind of conversation is really important for in-depth learning. And the other part that I love about the live is I've been doing this a really long time. So my evergreen's actually on its 10-year anniversary of this version.
Okay.
I had a version prior to that we had released in, I think it was 2008 or 2009. So it's been online a long time. It's had some iterations.
I didn't know, 10-year anniversary, congratulations.
But for this version, it's the 10-year anniversary. And what's going on is I keep learning and growing. I keep working with professionals. I keep looking at research. I keep, doing the field work that's needed.
Another key if you are having anyone that's giving you coaching or therapy, just like your doctor or your lawyer has to continue to go for continued education, they should be a lifelong learner.
Yeah, exactly. So I update the information.
Okay.
And in this round, there's going to be an update where I want to actually do a few bonus classes where I'm going to invite Aaron.
Aaron who?
You, Aaron Michael.
Oh, there we go.
You won't be part of the bulk of the live classes, but we'll do some additional bonus classes for those who wish to attend those. And one is going to be around addressing numbness and pain in the vulva, because there's so much of that. And if we don't have that resolved and then we jump into the egg, it doesn't make sense. So I want to slow things down for the women who are having those issues and give them hope and inspiration. And it's so amazing when you see a woman understand that she, through her own touch and breath, can solve maybe even a lifelong issue. And then when the course is complete, we're going to have another bonus where we're going to bridge the gap, because you were getting a lot of complaints. Okay, so I know how to use this thing. I've done a lot of solo practice, but I really don't understand what to do with what I've learned with a partner. And so I'm wanting to bridge that gap, and I'm wanting to bring you in because you have a lot of experience there, and we can use your methodology and what we're doing with the Jade Egg and really show like this is how it's harmoniously, seamlessly can come into partnered experience. So I'm very excited about that, and we will be doing an elite class on unprecedented pleasure on September 28th.
Unprecedented pleasure.
And if you're watching this episode long after the event has passed, you can still get that replay. It's free for everybody, and it's going to reveal a lot of new things that I haven't revealed before, not even to my trained ambassadors.
Oh, well, speaking of your ambassadors and the EPSM program, first of all, what does EPSM stand for? And I know that you're bringing some of them in to actually help with this whole new 10-year anniversary launch. And I'm curious to talk about that a bit.
So EPSM, Embodied Psychosexual Method. All right. It's a methodology where we look at how can we help people by being sensitive, A, that they are sexually sovereign, B, they have an erotic intelligence, and C, they're growing or individuating erotically. So how do we have the least amount of interference with this natural process while also supporting someone have a lot of breakthroughs? And it's something that really doesn't exist anywhere else that I can find. I say embodied because as a practitioner, most people in the sex coaching industry, they've learned things conceptually, but there's not a lot of embodiment. In fact, almost all the certifications out there that I know don't have an embodied live retreat where people are actually being looked at and tested through their embodiment, because that's actually the thing. If you don't know it in your body, how can you tell someone? It would be like someone never ever having sex, but fantasizing about what it's like in being a coach. I mean, that seems really crazy.
It's kind of like going to the cancer ward and the doctor's sitting there smoking a cigarette, which I hear does happen.
So that's what embodied psychosexual method is. It's a method that's now been part of a study looking at sexual dysfunction. We combined it with your work for some stunning results, and it's probably going to start changing the sex therapy industry in terms of how we approach things, which is really fabulous because it does need to change. And any therapist or doctor who's ever trained with me, they've gone on to become luminary doctors and therapists in their field because they understand something that's not been given to them in their medical or therapeutic training.
Well, so then who would be the kind of like ideal candidate for the ambassador program, and how are you incorporating them in this launch of Jade Egg?
Well, pretty much any practitioner. What I mean by that is if you're already working with clients or patients and you want to understand how to have a better conversation with that person and really help them have better results. So one of the people that we have, she's a very high-level trauma specialist, but she was looking for something embodied and different than all, and she's done every training in I don't know, a lot of trainings, but she found that this particular methodology is so dynamic, you can apply it to anyone at any time, at anywhere, and throughout the therapeutic process, and it's transforming her work in huge ways. So that's, if you're in the trauma world, great. If you're in the MD world, great. If you're in the psychotherapy world, if you are in any movement worlds, like a yoga teacher, dance teacher, martial arts teacher, or fitness trainer, anyone who works with the body, especially female bodies, because we do a lot more work around that, but we do cover the topic of male bodies.
Tell the story about the doctor that kind of developed a new way to deal with IUDs.
Yeah, so each ambassadors are basically alumni who are now spokespersons for sexual sovereignty in the world. And some of them have gone on to do extraordinary things, including our Dutch doctor who decided that putting in and extracting an IUD is extremely painful to women. Even though a lot of people say that cervix has no sensitivity, she's made note that it does hurt. And through learning this methodology and really becoming embodied herself in a very sensitive way, has developed a new protocol for doctors to insert and extract IUDs in the most pain-free way. So I find that extraordinary. There are quite a few of the alumni community that will be partaking in this, bringing their different gifts and different inspirations. I can't name them all, but really excited. This is a growing community. I'm not a standalone. I don't create Saida bots. What we're really doing is looking at how can we affect all the stratas of society? How can we make your genius come forward in a really powerful way? And there's no other way to do that than being embodied. I don't care. I think the reason leadership is falling apart all over this world is because it's not embodied. People don't walk their talk. They're not speaking what they really believe. They're just saying things in order to get things. And that genre of leadership is dying. So the new genre of leadership is the one where you come from your own lived truth, your own lived experience, and you might feel like, who am I? I'm just an ordinary person. And that's exactly the kind of person that we want, because that's the kind of people that are going to really create the most amount of change.
I remember you invited me to, well, we're going to soon switch over to the explicit part, but it was inspiring. You invited me to one of your retreats, and while I was there, in addition to the other two kind of people that were using that ambassador program, there was another two presentations that I just have to say I want to mention them.
Okay.
And one was this amazing combination of music and like pelvic floor movement. And I've led pelvic floor practices before to get people into it, but I just love this version of it. And then also there was another one too, which, you know, seeing the pelvic floor on a piece of paper as a flat map, trying to do a 3D representation, frankly, it is really confusing. You're like, where's north, where's south, east, west? How does this get oriented on the body? And I mean, now it's second nature for me, but I remember when I first really had to look and do a mind trick on it. And so the other ambassador was actually taking hand knit.
Two of them, put that together.
Two of them, okay. Yep. Hand knit body parts that were then able to like really open everything up, had different textures. So I don't know, could you tell me about those two things?
They wanted to create an ability to learn pleasure anatomy, to teach this to teens and people everywhere, but a way to have direct contact with the different parts of the anatomy and the story of those parts, which then allows you to understand there's a whole dynamic living pleasure ecosystem in that arena of the body. So I thought, how spectacular is that? And then the other, she's just an incredible music and visual artist. I think
amazing.
Her song was called Vaggie Squeeze. Fantastic. So whatever the case, I just love the learning and growth process. It's an ongoing thing. I'm still learning and growing. My embodiment keeps deepening. A true practitioner never stops practicing. And that's the difference between someone who's just excited and parroting and they're like exploring things and they're just kind of saying what they read or sharing from, a workshop. Fantastic. Like, keep exploring. That's awesome. Just don't call yourself an educator, because there's a lot more responsibility to that title.
Well, that's going to end the free part of this podcast. We're going to be getting into that's quite a deal, I think, that people are getting to listen into. But I think this is such an important topic. But what you will find in the explicit part of this podcast is we're going to be going into, what is it like to actually have sex with a true Jade Egg practitioner versus those that have maybe kind of dabbled in it. Mm-hmm. Also, we're going to be having a look at how does an actual Jade Egg practice create relational as well as sexual maturity. Because I think that's really important part, because I can't say how many practitioners, quote unquote, have been coming to me because either they were training or had been trained and said that they just did not know how to use this in their relationship. In fact, most of them were single and couldn't get a boyfriend. And then I also wanted to go into lastly, like, what is the vision for sex therapy, the sexual wellness industry, with all that you're doing, and yeah. So
I want to share some fun stories too.
All right, well, let's get into it.
Okay.
All right, I want to start off by saying that I've been I've had sex with a number of people that have, done some Jade Egg practice, and some of those are teachers and some of those are not. And
jeez, you've made your rounds?
Oh, and some of the things that I noticed was that the amount of either like relational maturity that was there or sexual ability in the bedroom was like it was menial. Like, I mean, menial is the right word, but like it was kind of I could feel that they were able to maybe do a little squeeze,
but not much different than someone who hadn't trained.
Yeah, well, I mean, put it this way: some people that haven't trained, they don't know how to squeeze anyway. So there was that, but I definitely wasn't being introduced to the goddess. There was not this kind of like next level hallelujah thing, and but at the same time, I was like, hey, but there's something there. They at least could squeeze their pelvic floor. They knew what a Kegel was, but essentially, I didn't really know. I couldn't really feel much of a difference between a person who's done Kegels and a person who used the egg.
Okay.
However, I remember the first time that you and I had sex, and that was a very different experience.
What happened?
Well, felt like I was kind of in an Olympic match with a judo master. I've been a competitive wrestler and fighter, and and it was so. I mean, physically though, there would be times where my entire penis. I mean, I guess it makes sense after hearing how you're shooting eggs, out of your vagina. But it was not only just the pushing where all of a sudden my cock would like go out, but like almost at the last instant it would be like grabbed and then like pulled back in and turned and twisted and
flipped around
and it, I mean, not to the point that anything came off, don't worry, it's still intact. So it was a pleasurable experience.
Pleasurable judo.
Yes, exactly. And on top of that, also the aliveness of the walls, the wave-like sensations of the vaginal walls. It also felt like it could massage, it could throw, it could suck. There was an extreme amount of heat, almost like an electrical current that felt good, not like getting zapped, but like this buzzing sensation. There was the ability not to just arouse, but also to relax. The ability to excite, where you'd feel like, oh, there's about to like I'm about to ejaculate, but then also the ability to like then take that down so that then ejaculation it doesn't happen and everything's prolonged. And for myself, I actually felt quite met, and that was something that was like a really powerful experience. And yeah, so I'm curious, what is it about your practice that has allowed for that? Now, I know you said that sometimes a woman will go to, is like, oh, I'm able to teach this. I did 5 minutes a day, for the last 3 months, and therefore I can. Well, how did your practice go, and does everyone need to do that amount of practice?
No. Okay, so as I said before, when I start something, I go all the way and I go deep. And my first teacher was a man, and he basically said, the way that you're going to pay me is you need to train every day, twice a day, hour and a half each time. Okay. So he set that law, and because he hadn't charged me physical money, then I felt like obligated to quote unquote pay by investing time. He already knew that I was like a person who could learn and be vigilant on things. Yes. I'd been a professional dancer.
So you took your practice seriously?
Yeah, I took it seriously. So every morning and every night for an hour and a half for the first 3 years, I didn't skip a single day. And
that was an hour and a half total, or hour and a half morning, hour and a half at night?
3 hours total a day.
All right.
And I never ever missed a training. So even if I went out to a party or I was traveling or I was visiting family, everybody knew at some point Saida's going to disappear and she's doing her thing. And I learned so much in that immersive training. Things started really opening up. I was having all kinds of bizarre energetic experiences. I was having visuals. I mean, a lot of things were opening up. Now I understand why, because of how the cervix can actually induce psychedelic states and a lot of different types of sensation. But back then, nobody explained any of that to me. So it wasn't an hour and a half of Jade Egg practice. It was like an hour of preliminary practice to get my emotional body harmonized and right. It was about getting the physical form like open, and then going into a practice that was very attentive. So that's why it took so long.
Oh.
Yes.
Welcome to the guest audio insert of the podcast,
where you get to hear the genius of our guest shine. So I'm lying on my back. I'm getting ready to introduce the Jade Egg to my body, and the practice that I want to do with you today is a practice that you can bring into your partnered experiences. So if you are a partner to someone with a vulva, you'll want to listen and feel into how you could translate what I'm saying into the way that you touch your partner before or even during a partnered experience. So let's begin first just resting both hands on our chest and starting to pay attention to the way we're breathing. And see if you can sense the gentle beat of your own heart, becoming inwardly aware of yourself. And then, if it's comfortable, bring one hand down to your lower belly, between the navel and your pubic bone, or if you're very comfortable, placing a hand over the vulva. And we're just going to take 3 connected breaths. Breathing in, sighing out, no. Breathing in, and just for a moment, feeling that relationship between your heart and your genitals, between how you feel yourself to be and your own sensuality and sexuality. And just bringing everything into this present moment. Getting connected this way really supports even more connected, pleasurable feelings, whether it's a solo self-pleasuring practice or a partnered pleasure practice, or even just playful sexual connection. And so before we're using the egg, or before using a toy, or before any form of penetration, this next practice is really important, especially for those of us who may have had a bad pelvic exam or another form of trauma to this area, or just being disrespected, or not even knowing that what I'm about to share with you is a possibility. So I have my hand resting over the vulva, and I'm feeling 2 things. I'm feeling my hand sensing the vulva, warm and soft, sensing the shape and curves. But I'm also sensing from my vulva into the touch, the heat of the hand, the weight of the hand, the shape, and any other textures that are available to sense right now. My other hand is still resting on my chest, and that weight of the hand on the chest, it just creates this beautiful sense of security, of connection, of appreciation, and of trust. So moving into the next phase of the practice, just gently going to ask my vulva, and specifically my vagina, if she is ready and willing to receive touch and to also receive the egg. Don't worry if you don't have an egg. This practice can be done just with your hands, just with your fingers. So it would be receiving the touch of a finger or the insertion of a finger, for example. Whatever the case, or if you are the partner in doing the touching, in this moment we're going to ask permission from the vulva to see if she's a yes or a no to receiving the touch and the insertion of the finger or the egg. So just inwardly checking in. Would you like to receive touch, my finger, the egg, whatever it might be? And now we just listen. Listen for a yes. Today my body is a big yes, and that shows up with feeling my legs kind of dropping open a little more. Feeling my small of my back slightly arching and pressing the vulva more fully into my hand. And feeling almost like extra saliva in my mouth, that parasympathetic response of relaxed arousal. So just check in and notice if you have any signs of full body yes, but especially yes from the vulva and vagina. And some days it might actually be a no, just no. And no's are so beautifully welcomed. And there's so many other things we can do without having to insert anything. And just thanking the vulva if it is a no for that information and deeply respecting it. And sometimes we're not sure. It's kind of a maybe, yeah, I don't know. So in the case of maybe, see if you can open up your legs, slightly arch your back so that your vulva presses into your hand a bit more, and notice how that feels, and if it feels like it's enjoyable to move into that greater opening of the entire front body. Or try and know where the legs close up, your back flattens a bit against the mat or the bed, and there's a slight closing feeling in the front body. And notice if that feels more comfortable. And you can stay with that particular part of the practice until you get a clear yes or a clear no. But imagine we got a yes, and to keep things really simple today, we'll just use the fingertip, which I'm putting some saliva on, and just gently bringing that fingertip, parting the inner lips, and placing the fingertip right at the opening and pausing there. And we're going to take another 3 full breaths. And again, just a little check-in, and notice with the body, if the body is open to receiving something entering or not, and respecting whatever the message is. If you do get a yes, this is where you can start to take a nice deep breath in and imagine yawning open your vagina. So open your mouth as you breathe in. Oh, and then equally open the vagina. And then relax. You will notice if you inhale and push your belly all the way out, arch your back a little bit, and feel almost like a pushing down sensation as you yawn. The vaginal opening opens a bit, and then just relax. If you keep breathing like this slowly, your own body will draw your finger in. And in that drawing of the finger in, you can stop at any time, take more connected breaths, and just see if you can relax with the taking in of the finger, the egg, the dildo, or any toy or a penis. And for the sake of today's practice, we're just gonna very gently inhale, kind of do this yawning thing, and slowly withdraw our finger, placing and cupping over the vulva again, finishing with gratitude and appreciation. Nice full breath in, sighing out, and just ending for a moment. And if your legs aren't already straightened, see if you can relax your legs, relax, open your arms as well. And just imagine lying on a bed of moss in a beautiful forest, or on some warm sand on a beautiful beach, allowing the whole backside of your body to nestle in and to relax. Just notice any sensations, any thoughts, any feelings. Just noticing them. And then brush your hands, put your hands over your eyes, and releasing a final gratitude and thank you. And completing this little practice.
And now back to the podcast.
And those days when I was in my 20s, I was erratic. I was a very emotional person. I was poor, so I was always stressed about how am I going to eat, how am I going to pay my rent. I had, at one point, 5 different jobs that I was doing simultaneously, not in the same moment, but in the same year, and just really lost. I didn't have a good sense of direction. My energy was scattered. I was pretty much hunting men down for temporary pleasures that were never satisfying. And so my teacher, he finally interrupted me and said, you got to stop that. You really need to train and just stop, or you're going to hurt yourself. And so the training I took super seriously, but what it started to do is really harness me as a human being. And this is why I teach Jade Egg as a 2-pillar process. One side, yes, is maturing your sexuality. There's a growth process that needs to happen with interoceptive awareness. None of us really have it. The most we're aware of is pain when we menstruate, something like this, or pain during sex, but we don't really have a lot of sensitivity otherwise. And then there's the emotional component, and we're a lot of women, we get overwhelmed by our emotions, or we manipulate with our emotions, or we are manipulated by emotions. So there's a lot going on in the emotional maturity side of things. And I noticed in this industry, if you make someone really strong sexually, they become extremely magnetic and they can make stuff happen. But if they haven't trained their emotional body, they're like this young person with a lot of power, and so they end up doing things like sleeping with their students, or just making shitty decisions without integrity.
Kind of reminds me of that Hulk image, or the thing, it's like this so strong, but doesn't really know how to harness that power.
Yeah, exactly. So I understood that, and I also saw on this other side, if you only do all the emotional, spiritual, psychological practice, but you don't harness the sexual, then the body also suffers. So those became very strong 2-pillar process of growing and blooming emotionally while sexually cultivating.
Okay. Well, then that kind of brings us to this relational and sexual maturity. And some people, at least if you go to reproductive sex ed, it talks about, when you hit puberty, get some pubes, all of a sudden you're sexually mature because you can get pregnant or get somebody pregnant. Well, I feel that's a really piss poor definition for sexual maturity, because I think there are, just the ability, I think it's more about sexual fluency as opposed to just literacy. Literacy meaning that you understand reproductive health. Fluency meaning you understand what you like, you can communicate what you like, you can bring it about. But even beyond that, though, is a really deeper understanding of one's body mechanics, one's emotions that happen when entering into either a sexual experience or a relationship that has a sexual component to it. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about how doing all of that practice kind of brought that sort of balance, both sexually. I'd like to hear some stories about how it changed things sexually for you, but also then how it changed things relationally.
Well, I think a really interesting story happened once meeting a person where he was bragging about his mouth skills and also kind of pining that he'd never met a woman who was very like a squirter.
Okay.
And so he kept going on and on, but his mouth skills really like, oh, just to have someone like squirt on my face would be amazing. And so I just listened to him for quite a few hours.
Where was this conversation happening?
We were bicycling, going to like a temple in Thailand somewhere.
Jeez, like more people should go to the temple. That's the kind of conversation one has on the way to the temple.
So on the way back from the temple, when we were nearing where we were staying, I said to him, meet me at 9 p.m. by the pool tonight. And he's like, okay. And because I was like, I gotta test this mouth. Like he's just bragged so much about it. We gotta see what he's got. And
remember some of the things he said? But
no, I don't remember. That was too long ago.
All our male listeners were like, come on, tell me the secrets of the temple bicycle ride conversation around oral
so I
skills.
Can do it.
Yeah, precisely.
I think it was probably along the lines of how much he likes the smell, the taste, the textures. Like he was very descriptive, as though someone who loves a really good meal and they went to this beautiful restaurant. They're like, oh my gosh, I had the best meal of my life. And the way it looked, the way it tasted, the way, you know how a person describes a meal.
So all you guys out there, it's not about bragging about what you're going to do or how big or small or whatever it is that's going on. It's how much you appreciate and demonstrating the level of details by which you appreciate and adore a certain part or a whole woman. Yes. I think is going to take you a lot farther.
And things like, I just love to do it for hours. I just get lost in it. I go into another space. And I was like, I don't think I've ever had anyone spend hours.
Well, so many women though are like really concerned. Does this person do this to me? Are they liking it? Are they bored? And then they go
because we don't get any feedback.
Yeah.
And often, if I've had bad experiences where someone's basically like licks the right nipple, the left nipple, licks the clit, and then just wants to go in. I'm like, what was that? Like, it's not like I'm a machine and you just flick some switch. Anyways, so with this man, what I didn't know, and I've learned over time, that often men who talk extensively like this, they're usually having to compensate for something. And so what he had was not only a micro penis, it was a micro penis, because it was like the size of my pinky finger, erect. But he also had premature ejaculation. He could never last longer than maybe 30 seconds.
Okay.
So, he had a lot of anxiety around his penis and how long he could last. And so when that came up, I was like, I don't care. I play with an egg. Do you know how small that thing is?
Yeah, that egg would be smaller than your pinky.
It's definitely not this like...
And does it give you pleasure?
Yeah, a lot of pleasure, the egg. So, and he had this really cool piercing like through it. So when it came to that time, I had a great time with the oral part, but I was like, I definitely like penetration and something I enjoy. So I wanted that, and I said, look, here's how we're gonna do it. I don't need you to do anything. You can relax. Let's just have fun. It doesn't matter. And I don't know what happened, if it was my attitude, if it was the egg skill, but I actually sat on him, which is not an easy position for people to stay hard for a long time. Yeah. And I just sat there and I played. And I played with his penis for an hour and a half.
Well, show kind of, like what do you mean by you played with it? With your vagina?
A lot of people are going to be listening to this, but essentially I was just like playing with the vaginal walls. I call that vaginal dexterity. It's something that you do with the practice. When you do it properly, you're able to kind of play the flute with the different layers of your pelvic floor. And it creates a lot of delicious sensations for me, but also for the person who's receiving.
So it creates this kind of like wave-like motions, which is what I was describing that I felt as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can intentionally move that way. There's also a very natural way that the body will move. When you train the body, you don't need to think. There's a lot of your sexual response will just be or instinctual, but with training. So that's super nice. But you can, even when it's instinctual, then intentionally do something. Like you can intentionally push or squeeze or play the flute. So I was playing the flute, and he stayed erect and never came in that entire hour and a half. And it was the first time in his life.
How long would he normally last?
30 seconds.
Wow. From 30 seconds to 30 minutes times 3. Not bad.
Yeah. So essentially what I learned in that moment is when a practitioner of this egg practice is also equipped to be a healer. And I realized that was sexual healing, and I didn't want to have necessarily a relationship with the person. But now he had an imprint of being seen as a man and being enjoyed and actually showing up in the way he really had longed to show up, and that maybe the problem wasn't actually with him. And so it was a blessing, and I realized I didn't know my vagina could heal like that. And so that was a whole new level of responsibility that I understood.
Well, this is something that I find interesting, because the women that, have seen before you that were doing the Jade Egg practice, and those that have just done Kegels, they have this ability to squeeze, kind of a little bit like this. But then there's this ability to also, some of them have this ability to create more of a suction. But when I speak to them, a lot of times they could never really partner with a guy, because then the guy would just ejaculate really quickly. What are some of the things, because I noticed with you, you're not just creating suction, you're actually also like beaming energy down and charging up the cock, the testicles, the entire body of me. So what are some of the things then that you do besides the wave-like motion? Let's go into some of those details there.
Trade secrets.
Hey, there we go.
Well, I mean, again, a lot of my movement is instinctual.
Yeah.
So I think if I am quote unquote doing anything, is I'm fully being a neurotic being.
Yes.
So now there's an integration. I don't feel a separation from where my mind is. I'm very present. From where my heart is, I'm very open emotionally. And from where my sexuality is, which is also very attentive. And it's so attentive that the slightest, like just the tip, can lead to orgasm and bliss right away.
Yeah, I can testify to that.
So there's a beautiful connection to that. There's also stamina, and a lot of times women feel like they can't handle or last very long, but using the egg does thicken the vaginal walls. It allows you to produce more lubrication.
Yes.
And just because the vaginal walls are being told, like, there's something here, so lubricate, because you're getting that gentle pressure, consistent pressure all the time. This has actually solved vaginal dryness for a lot of my postmenopausal women who've had that problem. So it's not so much a trick, it's not so much a technique, it's the whole person integrated and moving as a whole person and responding to arousal. And each day, there's a different quality of sexuality. Sometimes in the cycle, it's like the wild woman who just wants to be beast-like.
Yes.
And another time in the cycle, there's a very tender, vulnerable, just barely move, but the energetics are cosmic. So having availability, accessibility to that spectrum of our eroticism is what came from doing this practice, because I got to know myself very deeply as my own best lover. And I remember once I decided I'm going to just be celibate now because I need to know what's me.
Yes.
And in that time of celibacy, what I found was I had this moment, I still remember it now, I wasn't really touching myself. I was laying in bed. I think I had the egg in, but I was just breathing. I wasn't stimulating. I wasn't riding a finger or anything. I was just laying on my back. And I went into a state of cosmic orgasm. I'd never had that experience before. Up until then, I did not again understand what was happening then, but I think the cervix probably was moving a lot in the way I was breathing, but it wasn't conscious.
Yes.
The practice teaches you that without you needing to really know what's going on. So my body instinctually understood. So I go into this cosmic orgasm, and when I come out of it, it's so freaking good. I'm like, how am I ever gonna have sex with a human again. Like, that was way beyond any human sex I've ever had. And it was a conundrum for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, does this mean I'm never gonna be sexual again? And then one day I realized, oh, partnered sex is about celebration. There's a mystery there that I don't understand, because when two people come together, you don't know what's going to happen. There's just so many different things that can arise. And that's the beauty of it. And so am I fully equipped to meet that, and not only meet it, to bring something to the table? I feel one of the things I bring to the table is a full gourmet plate. So my body's wide awake, my heart's wide awake, my being's wide awake. I'm very sensitive, so the subtlest movement is ecstasy, and I also can move like a beast. So I have that virility and that capability and variety of capacity because of the practice. So that's essentially what I'm bringing, less than like a specific technique. And so when you're feeling certain things, it's purely the instinctual, like, I am following my pleasure 100% of the time. And whatever that pleasure, it's leading me. I'm not leading it.
Right. I nerd out on anatomy. I have a very strong sense of interoceptive awareness.
You're totally sex geek.
and proprioception. So, I am literally like, there's times where your cervix is literally like, feels that it's almost at the entrance, and other times that it's so deep that then it like can't be reached. I feel that there is like a current of sensation that's actually entering through the pee hole, the urethra, and like going down into the shaft, and my balls and everything start to get heated. I also feel it going up my spine. I feel like there's this almost electric buzz that'll happen. And the big thing is and this is, I think, sometimes I get really, in my background's in cognitive semiotics, and so I've been studied, like the neuroscience and the philosophy of language. And so when I hear the word embodied, which just gets thrown around like a 2-cent hooker these days.
Jeez.
It's horrible, I know. And they embodied this, embodied that. It's like, well, what does that even mean? And people are like, oh, it just means your whole body. And I'm like, oh, come on. So, but the big thing with embodiment is that there actually is not a separation of
between mind
and body.
Correct. Yeah.
But that the mind is embodied, meaning that the whole body itself allows you to make sense of the world, navigate the world.
Not be, right?
It's a part of cognition itself. So when there is that separation, though, of the quote-unquote mental capacities, or the psyche, and people go into their head and don't feel their body, or the other way around, but when there's that disconnect, it's that disassociation that is unhealthy. And so when having then a sexual experience with you, I feel very much that internal world of your CUV complex, the clitoral, urethral, vaginal complex, as well as then the cervix and the womb. It's connected to the whole body. Yes. So there are certain sensations that will correspond to different looks on your face. Also, like when your eyes have this way to glass over, there are these altered states that you will go into. And I will also, it's like a psychedelic state, and I will feel myself dissolving. There will be sounds that come out of me that are like
You're
where is this?
reminding me of that. The light.
All right. Well, okay then. Tell us about some stories of lovers that have not been able to handle that energy.
Yeah. Well, for a little while, I jokingly said I don't think I should have sex with mortals anymore.
What does that mean?
It just means that there actually is an upgrade that happens in your nervous system the more you train. Many old lineages knew and understood that. And so that's why they have a very specific sequence of how you get your nervous system to upgrade in a way that you don't fry anything, and that your capacity to experience quote-unquote bliss states gets higher and higher. So what's really interesting, because we're pain-oriented culture, we have actually very little capacity for pleasure and bliss.
Yes.
We sort of short out very quickly with that. We just like zap and we want it over. But if you are a practitioner, you are literally training your body to have greater and greater capacities for this type of sensation, induced whether it's in the sexual experience or even just in purely a meditation experience. So it doesn't just need sex to happen. So one of the things I started noticing being a practitioner for a long time, and past partners also being practitioners, so I didn't really have to worry too much because they were practicing and I was practicing. I wasn't thinking anything of it. But then I had, my marriage ended and there was a gap between that and when I met you. And in that time, and I was practicing, I went deep into my practice again. I did have an experience with someone that then made me go, okay, no more sex with mortals.
Tell us about that.
Well, he was a dom, and I thought, you know, that's hot. And then someone who's like, I wanted a mature man. I didn't want an immature man. I wanted a man who was in control of his erotic energy, so he wasn't going to be like a puppy dog all over me. I wanted a man who felt like he could control the space, because I like to surrender and relax, and so some form of bedroom confidence was a turn on for me. So he seemed to have all of that. Plus, he refused to flirt with me in very specific ways. So he's creating a lot of anticipation. He goes, no, that's for when I see you. And I hadn't agreed to see him yet. So he had this kind of fun way of like making me curious. And so finally I said, fine, okay, let's meet. And so we met, and he was just a lovely person. But when we finally got to the point of intercourse, it lasted very little because he started screaming. And like not nice sounding screams, like
so
pain
this isn't like
screams.
I'm coming, like that.
No. This is a person who, you know, has like a normal job. Okay, he's not like a freak or doing lots of drugs or like out to outer space somewhere. He's like as normal as you can get.
He's a firefighter, right?
Yeah, he's running 2 fire stations.
All right,
like
that's some good detail.
He's normal. He's got a kid. He's like responsible, like normal human.
That's pretty hot, firefighter. Okay.
So anyways, he's yelling, but it sounds like he's in pain. And then he's saying he is. And then he's saying that the light. And then I was like, what's going on? He's seeing this dark blue light all around. It was firing in his brain. It was everywhere he was looking. And I laughed, but I also understood, like, okay, I shouldn't be sexual with people who aren't trained, because I'm at this stage where my energetic system is really strong, but I'm maybe not at the developmental stage where I can dial it back like appropriately. I'm not paying attention to it because I haven't had to, because my partners have all been trained and have that capacity. So the things that you call a pleasant buzz, for him was like pain. He did not like being electrocuted, and he certainly didn't like the psychedelic experience that happened.
Well, then how would you say for someone then who's like done your training, then how do they... I'm
not saying that this happens all the time, by the way. It's just like a story, but an important story, because as you train yourself, you do become more powerful, and with that power comes conscious responsibility. And as a woman, if you've never felt powerful and suddenly you have sexual power and you can make things happen, you can become awful really fast. So again, that emotional maturity, because you were asking me, like, how are you bringing this to the table? That's really important, to have that level of integrity and to know your limitations, and to know, maybe it's just best I do use my egg and I don't go and have this experience at this time because I'm kind of feeling off in myself or whatever. There were many stages to my development. In the early stages, it was all about proving that I was attractive. Like, I just wanted that reflection. But once I understood that, I'm like, I don't need that anymore. But then I would need other things. And so there are many stages to developing.
How was the tongue, by the way, from the guy at the pool?
Oh, I said it was a few hours. It was awesome.
Okay, so it did actually. Sorry, that question was still lingering in my mind because we never quite found that out there.
It was amazing, but at some point, I need the penetration. So.
Okay. Anyways, now that we've helped deal with my question that was kind of lingering in the back of my head, going forward,
yes,
I'm curious to hear a little bit more about this relational and sexual maturity, because one thing that I noticed when we first had sex, it wasn't, you weren't laying out all these rules. Like I've noticed a lot of times, like women from the tantra world, or like women that do these like egg practices, like a lot of guys I notice, they complain about them because all of a sudden the woman's like, you will not come, you will not, you will
Thou
do
shalt
this
not.
ritual. Yeah, it's like there's like the 10 commandments of my pussy, which, you know, by the way, I think it's really important to know what it is that you want. It's important to be able to communicate what you want. But in terms of the delivery of it, it might be more of an invitation.
Yes. What did your friend say? A little sweetness that goes much further than vinegar.
Yeah, precisely. A little bit of honey goes further than vinegar. Well, I personally like vinegar a lot, but I also love honey. Anyway, so
Together.
there can be certain dressings. Though I think I'm more of the vinegar sour type on the palate there, unless it's fruit or honey.
But you meant attitude.
Yes, he meant attitude. And basically like yelling, complaining, chiding to get your way versus, you know, like kind of...
Or humiliating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I noticed though, you had mentioned to me that when you're typically first with a man, you actually won't mention things about your knowledge base, and you also won't be like taking charge.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, I want to see what they got.
Okay.
And with men, if you ask them things or interfere, they actually can get insecure really fast or start to shut down. And I'm more interested in them being fully lit up and just showing me, like, what do they love? What are they interested in? Fully knowing that the first time you have sex with someone is often awkward. And so I attempt to regulate my nervous system so there's no awkwardness, there's ease, I'm constantly reflecting my interest and like the things I'm enjoying, just to sort of create a supportive environment. And then I can learn, like, do I want to have this again or not? Because
that was one of the things that I noticed. I mean, it reminds me when I listen to some of the stuff from Bruce Lee. He's like, be like water, you know, and when having sex with you, it was as if wherever I moved or however I moved, you were able to move with me. Maybe people could relate to it. Like when you're with an expert dancer, I mean, if you ever get a chance to go to like some dance class and you have the instructor exactly says, okay, guide me here. It's like the second you, like even just the slight lightest pressure, it's like vroom, the whole body moves and everything spins, and it's an extreme amount of listening and responsiveness. And I hadn't encountered that in the same way in the bedroom, that there was this extreme ability to respond that then just created this freedom. Like whatever I did was like, felt pretty freaking masterful.
That is one of the feedbacks that I got throughout my life was, you really make a guy feel like he's a king, and that you know, I'm awesome in the bed or whatever. And I was like, what happens normally? Like, I don't understand, because I really firmly believe if I'm practicing self-respect, I can extend that respect to a person. If I'm going to engage sexually with someone, there needs to be some respect in that space, or I'm not going to engage. And so, of course, then, if that's the basis of being there, I'm going to then bring in curiosity. Curiosity is like super important. Like, what's going on? How's this person responding? What do they like? Some men are very kinky. Some men are very sensitive and emotional. Some men, like, there's many different ways that people in general are. And then depending on the time of month, I'm feeling different. And sometimes I want something here and there's something there. So there's the physical responsiveness and that ability to flow with whatever's there, which is very different than this kind of like, no, it needs to happen this way in a conversation, and then it also, my body only likes it in this way. That's just a reflection. If you are encountering quote unquote practitioners who behave that way, they weren't properly trained. So proper training means that no matter where you're at in your training, there's an integration. So even as a beginner, women who are like beginners and learning this stuff with me, beginner doesn't mean less than. You're just learning the first few steps of this dance, but you learn it in a way that allows to bring online your erotic intelligence. And because of that, then even with that first step, you are more responsive and attentive to yourself, to the other. There's going to be plenty of learning and mistakes, and who cares? But if in the beginning there's already this rigidity that's happening, then they haven't been properly trained, because that rigidity is weird. Like, it shouldn't actually be part of sexual practice.
What's then that opposite side of the rigidity? How would you describe that? I mean, well, I'll ask it differently.
Well, it's the responsiveness. It's like, so just in very basic terminology, in Taoist practice, in Chinese medicine, they look at the organs being related to the emotions. Okay, so one of the first factors to really understanding yourself as a woman in this practice with penetration is, are you centered in your power? That's an earth element. And when you're centered in yourself, you can be wide open, but it's not like a openness that's scattered and disconnected. It's an openness that's deeply rooted.
Yes.
It's very present. So now I'm both in my power, but I'm receptive, I'm open, I'm curious. This is a super basic level practice. So if it's not there, it's just not been kept from someone, or the teacher doesn't know themselves.
The other side of the rigidity that I've encountered in either the Tantra world or those who've done the Jade Egg practice but haven't maybe done it correctly is that there's also either there's the rigidity, but then there's also this kind of like voracious wild side that can start to lend towards being destructive. And I think a lot of times it gets like, oh, it's the Kali energy, so one needs to like be okay with it. Meanwhile, their life seems to be chaos. They can't hold a longer term relationship. The partners that are with them feel like just kind of like either attacked, bashed, or made small, and then they go after the next, and then that same cycle keeps happening, or guys just go like, stay away from me. There's like this erraticness to that behavior. And so, I mean, tell me a little bit more, because maybe this is then what you're speaking about with the understanding of the psychosexual map of the vagina and the internal organs and how that relates. And so how does this practice then create the relational maturity?
Well, I think the first layer of it, creating emotional and psychological maturity, that growth process, is to understand what sovereignty versus victimhood. That's taught right from the beginning.
Yeah.
So a victim, everything happens to you. You don't have the power to do anything about it. And therefore, you're just going to continue being in your shitty situations. Yeah. A sovereign person, because it's for everybody, is a person who understands, no, I'm a participant in life. I 100% am responsible to how I respond to that which arises in my life. You're not always responsible for what shows up, because that is life. Like, a car accident isn't always our fault. But how we respond to that is going to determine how we heal and how we progress. So understanding just that basics, then when I can take full responsibility, all right, then I'm given the psychosexual framework. Okay, let's just look at anger, because it's a huge one with sex and women and frustration. And in the sexual reflexology, it's around the area of the urethral sponge. Yeah. And when that area of the urethral sponge is touched, a lot of women say they release anger. Yeah. So it's really intriguing to me.
I've noticed that.
Right? So imagine that you use a conscious practice where you activate the physical tissue with squeezing and relaxing. So you're doing like a pulsing, rhythmical thing. Maybe the finger's inside, maybe the egg is inside, maybe it's a penis, maybe it's something else, but your actual practice, whatever you're doing, you're breathing and allowing the tissue to move. And now you're focusing. The mind is so powerful. I mean, athletes use this all the time. They can visualize their, whatever sport they're in, their race, and they go through the whole thing, and the body brain thinks that they've actually done it. Yes. There's no difference between the visualization and the doingness of it. So now you're in the body and you're visualizing this area of the vagina, and every time you breathe in, you're bringing in, say, kindness, this experience. Have you ever been kind to your own vagina or your own self or your own body? This is going to be confronting. And then when you exhale, you start to release frustration, the feeling of lack, the feeling of greed, the
Yes.
feeling of anger. And so this, in the beginning days, for me was really powerful. I thought it was bullshit, to be honest. I was like, what? Color and sounds and crap. Like, what the hell is this crap? But I decided, wait, I'm going to test it. And I did. I tested it over and over and over and over again until I actually had results from it. Now understanding way further in the future. Oh, when you're making these sounds, you're activating the vagus nerve. You know, when you're using visualization, you're literally creating what's the Neurosculpting Institute calls repatterning the
Lisa
story.
Wimberg, we have another episode with her
Right,
as well
coming out soon. And so all of these things are happening. I just didn't know that originally. And I was actually originally, once I'd done it myself and been teaching for a while, and I wanted to get a bit more scientific and less woo, I was like, well, maybe I just trash this psychosexual map because it's a bit edgy to like, and the amount of women who are outraged, they're like, what are you doing? This practice helped me so much.
Wow.
And then I realized this is why it's a psychosexual map, because it's simply a framework to assist us to make deeper contact with all the range of emotion and understand these are just energetic resources. So if you have a bunch of anger and you let yourself move through it, that same amount of anger becomes kindness. And that's really fascinating to me. And I've seen that in many lineages, not just one.
Yeah.
In science, they've seen that if you have a really strong emotion and you can let yourself fully be with it, it actually exhausts itself. It only has a certain amount of longevity. But if you don't fully feel it, then it goes like a broken record in the system, causing distress.
Well, that's something that, I mean, we've been traveling together now for a little over 2 years. And I've just noticed that I both meet the veracity in you, and that you definitely have a massive sexual appetite, which I love, because normally I'm the only one that has the massive sexual appetite in my past, and it's like, come on, like, don't you want more? I'm just starting over here. And with you, like, there's like this openness. It's like the waters are typically like this.
They're ready.
They're simmering, or kind of even starting at a nice, healthy boil. But at the same time, if, you know, life is driving me towards doing something else as opposed to, you know, several hours in the bed or whatever the norm is, it's I don't get the other side that I would feel a lot of times in relationships where maybe the person, it's like, I want it now, when I want it, and it needs to be then or not. And that was always a little bit confusing because, you know, like, also guys, you know, contrary to popular belief, are also not light switches that you just snap your
just
finger
like get an
and-
erection when you on vocal
I
command.
mean, that can happen. I did have one client who wanted to last 11 hours, get an erection on verbal command, and have complete sexual control over their orgasm, and then of course admitted to me that he was a virgin, never had sex before, and I was like, just so you know, reality
versus
is
fantasy.
Women don't actually want that.
Exactly.
And then he felt a lot of relief, and then within 3 days of training, all of a sudden he started to access these higher levels of pleasure.
Correct.
And so, I mean, tell me a bit then about the importance of self-practice, because so many quote-unquote practitioners, teachers, students, like, when I ask them about their self-practice, it either is non-existent or it's just a vibrator.
Yeah, well, I think interoceptive awareness, and we now recently, didn't you find a paper where it was indicating that that was one of the key factors to sexual satisfaction in partnered experiences?
Well, it was the subjective sexual arousal being when looking at vaginal pulse amplitude, VPA, which is basically they're taking a tampon-like tool and investigating the tissues and looking for concordance or an alignment between that, the physical
and what
reaction,
you're thinking.
and does a person actually get sexually aroused. And a big factor in it was interoceptive awareness. However, it only was showing concordance with some women and others not. And I think that there's a whole other topic to be had around that. In fact, we did do a talk on numbness and, again, not having that connection. So a really important part of this work is to establish that connection. But on the emotional side, though, what you were going to say, go ahead. The interceptive awareness.
Well, no, I just wanted to say, like, you won't develop that if you're not consistent with practice. And the thing is, when a person, we're bombarded with so much distress, stress, difficulty, challenges day in, day out. Imagine someone who has a career, who has kids, who's looking at world news, who's got aging parents, who's got a puppy that, I don't know, misbehaved. And it's just like there's so much happening. But if we don't have a moment where we can just marinate in our own essence, then we're kind of behaving a bit from a place of starvation, or what I call like the beggar's bowl.
Yes.
And so we will approach a partner like the beggar, like, you need to turn me on, you need to satisfy me, you need to do this, you need to do that, or you don't do this and you don't do that. And what that does is it actually ruins any kind of erotic tension, yumminess between two people when we have perhaps two beggars trying to get stuff from each other. So solo cultivation, no matter what you're doing, like, one of the ways I recommend to fertile women is to, in the stage between your menstruation to your ovulation, is when you do a lot of the sexual practice, because that's when you're naturally like opening up more, you're more aggressive, you're more out in the world, you want to meet people, you're feeling flirty. And then after the ovulation to menstruation, there's often this noticing of everything going wrong and like nitpicking and just having more of that sensitivity and more emotionality. So that's the time to do the emotional maturity pieces. So if you don't have a lot of time, you can also cycle through your basics. Okay, so I'm doing some physical training today. Like, imagine someone who only ever lifts weight but never actually addresses their anger issues. It's not going to get better. They're just going to be more sexy and built, but still angry. So if we just look at it that way, yes, do your physical training, your exercises, but also grow emotionally. How can you take more responsibility for how things are in your life? How can you let yourself be okay with the wide range of feeling? Because if you can do that, that's when you're rewarded with ecstatic states of pleasure within the sexual experience, because now you're capable of going almost anywhere in that spectrum.
Well, I mean, that's beautiful, because I think most people look at a self-practice as something that you either kind of do in a dark corner and hide, or that's what you do to tie you over until you get into a relationship.
Yeah, I don't agree. I think, yes, absolutely. I did this a lot when I was single. It was fabulous. It actually, wearing the egg and doing the practice allowed me to make way better relationship decisions. I think I would have made some bad decisions otherwise, because you just get horny and weird at times. So definitely this slowed me down. For other women, though, when they have very low kind of arousal or libido, it would actually help bring it up. For me, it tamed it a little bit. Because I was a bit out of control.
So it's creating balance again.
Creating balance. And then also I would just have to say that, building intimacy, emotional intimacy with yourself and examining the frameworks from which you operate, that takes a level of knowing yourself that then you can bring that into a relation and break some weird relating patterns, right? So if you accuse me of something and I just know that's not true at all, that's not... I would just calmly be able to say, oh, thank you for sharing that, but that's not at all like where I'm coming from. Here's where I'm coming from. But if I don't have that insight and you accuse me of something, I can just go, rah, I get really angry, or you don't love me, and get sad, or this relationship's over, we're done. So if we want longevity, not only in romantic sexual connections, but with family members, with teammates, like the ability to take some deep breaths when intensity is happening, not only is great in the bedroom, it really is great relationally. And if you want to sustain eroticism and charge longer than 6 months, you're going to need to mature emotionally. that's the only, I don't know a way around that.
Yeah.
Because an emotionally immature person cannot tolerate when the honeymoon quote quote phase kind of goes down, and now they have to responsibly nurture that part of the relationship because they can no longer rely on the hormones.
Well, that's sort of the other thing that I'd noticed is a lot of times the people that were coming to me to ask about having a practice to be able to find a boyfriend, to be able to enjoy a boyfriend, have a boyfriend enjoy them, not go away. They would come from a place of wanting, and I mean that in the older sense of the word wanting, which I always thought was just, I want this, I want that. And I would tell them, the word want means to lack. Like, he was found wanting, meaning lacking. And so in this pursuit of that what one does not have, they would always find what they don't have. And they would find that in the partner, they would find that in themselves. Whereas if they then started to do the self-practice and actually nurture inside themselves the very thing that they were looking for and finding inside themselves, all of a sudden it would appear.
Yeah.
And I'd seen that happen over and over and over again. And normally how that happens is a person goes, I've just reached the place where I no longer thought I wanted a partner and I didn't need them anymore, and then all of a sudden they appear. I'm like, yeah, that's because you actually were attractive then. Because you were calling that in, whereas before you didn't have it, so you weren't calling it in. And I've noticed in these 2 years as we travel together that when you are feeling that you want more sex, or if I'm off doing something, or you will do two things. One, if there's something that comes up that you're like, let's address this, and you get curious, as opposed to just projecting out all of these horrible thoughts and just kind of going into verbal
Doesn't mean
diarrhea.
I don't think them.
Well, that's the thing I've noticed though, because it took me a while to actually then hear hey, you're actually having emotional turmoil underneath the calm questioning, but then that turmoil goes away when you hear the answers and you're actually able to listen to them, as opposed to just trying to stack up evidence to what whatever conclusions you might have had in your mind.
Yeah, I'm always wrong. I can't possibly know what's true in you, and you are a pretty wild and super sexual person, and I've had a lot of pain in my past. It'd be very easy to project a lot of that pain on you. The only way I'm going to get to know you as the real you is through curiosity and being able to breathe through sometimes some very difficult truths.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing too, is that if you really want, for all you listening out there, a relationship that's amazing, it very well likely won't happen from the place that you once were. And what I mean by that is that you're imagining kind of your checklist of what the perfect partner is, but that's only come from your past experiences. Are you open to the possibility that the actual partner that could literally be there right in front of you? Because I want you all to know as well, those of you that are in partnerships, you could find that in that person there, and you've never realized it because you've always had that other mind frame. It's not just about having a different perspective. It's actually having a shift inside yourself and being able to understand that there's a whole other relationship that might not be happening that isn't just inside your own head.
Yeah.
And this piece here about the sexual self-practice that you do, for me, I haven't had a partner that's committed to that. I love when I just walk in the room and you're going at it.
Jeez.
Well, I mean, it's extremely arousing. It's inviting, because as the guy, a lot of times people don't think about this, but the pressure's on the guy to go ahead and get it up and to keep it up and to keep going and to come when or not before the other person does, and if they do come first, and to get it up again, and then there's the performance anxiety that happens. In fact, most erectile dysfunctions nowadays is psychological. The fastest growing population of that is psychological, and it's not over the age of 40 or 50 for cardiac reasons, physical reasons, but actually psychological reasons. And most guys will not speak about it. They would rather actually get out of the relationship than have to, have their masculinity questioned. And frankly, it's because when they do speak about it, they get, "Oh, are you not a man? Like, why can't you do
Exactly.
this?" So to actually feel that magnetic pull and energy of a sensual, sexually activated woman, like that just draws me in even more. Plus, at the same time, I know that you're able to handle yourself while I'm doing my other duties. So that way then when I do come to you, it's fully, you're charged, you're ready. Maybe sometimes I'm maybe feeling like a little bit low or down or tired, but then you can actually charge me up as opposed to like always needing to like feed off of my energy.
Yeah.
That's a big shift. I mean,
I think that's
talk
a
a little
good
bit.
place to
Well, no, I want
wrap
before we
things up.
wrap up, I want you to talk about that though from a woman's perspective. Like, what about your self-practice does this? Because you've spoken to some really serious practitioners out there, or some of these big name teachers that have come to you, and when you mentioned sexual self-practice with them,
You don't like it.
they ran off and saying, "No, that's the guy's responsibility." And to me, like, if you're a goddess and you can't create something and you need from someone else, then you're not a goddess. Like, get over yourself. Like, so
Yeah. Well, I
please
don't
talk
use
to me
that
about
word
this. Yeah, but
anymore.
I'm talking about the community out
I
there,
used
though.
to use it a long time ago. My business was actually called Jade Goddess, but then it got weird, and so I stopped using it.
People overuse certain words and then the meaning loses its potency. Like embodiment.
Anyways, so you're talking about erotic responsibility. And to be honest, to keep a charge, so there's a few things. As women, sometimes our bodies take a little bit longer to be ready for penetrative sex, for example. We're kind of almost ready always for kissing and touches and licks, but penetration, it takes a moment. So the Jade Egg practice is amazing for that because it can bring you, instead of always being what the Taoists call like cool energy, you can be near the boiling or simmering space within your arousal system. And that's really important because then it takes a little bit, maybe less time or effort to try and get you to that place where you're even interested, and you can more bring something to the table. So that actually is self-responsibility. It's not just on the partner, like you need to do these 20,000 things before we can have this 2-second moment of penetration. so there's that piece. And then I always noticed I've been sexually active quite a bit within my my devoted partnerships, but it's always important for me to reconnect with me. There's a moment in the day where I just need to feel my body, my energy, and just move it. I might be writing, a paper or doing a bunch of business, but then I'll get aroused just because I'm excited about what I'm creating. I'll take anywhere from like 30 seconds to 5 minutes to connect with myself, and then I go right back to work. That is really important to me, and that's part of the simmering process. And it's about normalizing the erotic in our everyday life and paying attention. Hormonally, we have many peaks throughout the day and night. And if you can start paying attention to those peak moments and you actually do something in the moment, you entrain your body to be much more open to pleasure, much more open to arousal. If you ignore those signals, over time you're going to flatline and then wonder where your libido went, where your arousal went. So part of this is nervous system entrainment, part of it is hormonal system entrainment. And when your body's giving you these signals, are you aware how many times in the day you get turned on? You might not be. A really cool thing also with wearing the egg regularly for women who are in the fertility phase of life, you can definitely see when you're ovulating. It's going to show because you have to blow through the hole to clean it every day, and then you'll have that egg white stuff that happens. So also in terms of tracking fertility, this practice puts you a lot more in attunement to that.
And what about for the women that are out of the fertility stage?
Well, you don't have the same urgency to know when you can get pregnant or not. So there's a lot more peace of mind. So I find that women who know this practice post-menopause are actually having some of the best sex of their lives. Some of them, it's the first time they actually start ejaculating, for example. Some of them, it's the first time they're having full body orgasms. And that's the gift they're giving themselves by taking the time to not have the framework of I'm old and everything's shutting down, but have the framework, this is my power stage of life. This is actually the most sexual time of my life. And I won't have to get pregnant, so I can be even more free and spontaneous.
Well, physical training, eating well, maintaining a healthy lifestyle is even more important in that phase, especially if you haven't been doing it beforehand. But even if you have, then it would make sense that this would be a practice that they would continue. Well, we are nearing the 2-hour mark, and I want to finish up though with asking, like, what is your vision for the sexual wellness field? Mm-hmm. What is your vision for your EPSM training and the Jade Egg and this kind of new wave of therapy since Masters and Johnson's?
Well, many years ago, I spoke to the United Nations around my idea of sexual sovereignty. Mm-hmm. And so my vision is that every single human being is recognized as being born with sovereignty, their body sovereignty. This is not in most Charter of Rights. So just that would be a huge change. Now, how do we make that happen if lawmakers and politicians don't care? We make it happen from the ground level first. So my desire is to impact as many individuals, normal people living normal lives, but having them understand this part of their body, taking responsibility for it, having fun while they do it, having better relations, for women having better menstrual cycles or better menopause or better birth experiences. All these facets of life that can bring a lot of pain, transforming those moments into more pleasurable moments and creating a society that's less harmful in that direction, has less shadow in that direction, and a more stable society because we're grounded and feeling good. And that's my vision, is that it happens from the roots up. And so when enough people realize I have the power to do this myself, I don't need to wait for anyone's permission, the information's here, it's on me whether or not I act on it. And if I act on it, my life, the quality of my life goes up extremely. Why am I waiting? Let me jump in. There's an amazing global community. People are like uplifting each other. They're celebrating each other. Yes, there's realness. There's no spiritual bypassing, but there's also this focus on, well, yeah, here's the shit that's going on, but here's what I'd love as the central premise to that form of community. All of that turns me on. And when we have enough people doing that, the lawmakers and the politicians will pay attention, and it will become part of the infrastructure of society. So for now, it's a silent rebellion that each individual gets to enjoy. Not always that silent if you're next to the bedrooms of those who've been trained by you. Well, that I think is a good place to go ahead and wrap up this conversation. And I just want to thank you for the work you do. And I also want to thank you for the amazing partner that you are, and also for taking this time to really bring some lucidity to the Jade Egg and the psychosexual aspect of people's bedroom lives. Such a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you to the listener. Really would love to hear back from you. So if you're watching this or watch any portion of this, let us know how it lands, what you're taking away, and we'll see you in the next episode. See you all, and thanks again for listening.